Hi, everyone. Hi. My objective, and I hope that this meets your objective if you have any, is over the next 45 minutes or so to help you own and embody the title CEO. I know most of you have that title already, but for me, it means Chief Energy Officer. So being able to mobilize your energy on demand, because the context we find ourselves in, it's exhausting, right? I mean, I don't need to be telling you, it's hard. I mean, people around me are telling me they're really tired. And as we've seen, Ollie, September's a long way away. And by then, who knows, the benchmark might be moved again. So we need to make the most of what we have without giving up our health while we're building wealth, which is what this conversation is about. So I'm going to tell you about me in a moment. I'm going to start sharing some slides. But what I wanted to say up front is, if you enjoy what I have to say and you have more questions at the end than I've covered, you can be in contact with me. I'll send a thank you note to Ollie to share with everybody. I'll include a summary of the framework that I'm going to take us through today. You can find me, I'll reach out to each of you on LinkedIn, and you can always be in touch with me. If I can help you, I will. If I can't, I'll try to find a resource that can. Because collectively as leaders, we absolutely have to look after our own personal well-being, which is what today is about. But ultimately, I do this work to help you to leverage the impact that your energy and well-being has on others. And that's the way that I try to rise the global tide, so to speak, because a rising tide lifts all boats. And there's no more, I think, important topic than this right now, because if we don't, the costs are high. So the umbrella, maybe just a thumbs up from Ollie. Can you see the slide? Excellent, just checking, because with Zoom, you just never know. So performance chemistry, there's a lot of chemistry, physiology that helps support really good performance. It's a wide topic, so there's a huge menu. And, I've come prepared, but I'm going to give you quite a bit, because I'd like each of you to be able to leave with at least one thing that you can put into your routine, because we know the stuff. A lot of what I'm going to share with you, it's not rocket science. But common knowledge is not common practice. And so it's important to be realistic and also look at the behavioral science that helps us to put new habits into place that can really benefit us. If we were able, I'd rather us be sitting in your local park. Well, the sun is here above Farnham. It wasn't earlier, it was pouring with rain. Very strange. But I'd be curious to know what's on your mind around well-being. So if there is anything in particular, maybe pop it into the chat. If there's a topic or a question that if I answered this morning, you'd feel like this was really good time spent. Yeah, I'd be curious to see that. So I'm going to keep chatting, but I'm going to keep my eye on the chat. So if there's a particular topic around your well-being or a question that you have, pop it in there, and I'll be sure to weave that in if I hadn't already intended to do so. I know that sleep has come up a lot. I hosted 2 Vistage groups this week, and we ended up speaking a lot about being able to tune out at the end of the day, because it's easy to tune in generally when you're inspired and you love your business and the work that you do, but then unplugging is hard. And we absolutely need to do that if we want to really show up at our best. My approach, I'm a dietitian by qualification. I qualified in 2000. I did clinical practice for 5 years. In 2006, I started working with Vitality and BankMed in South Africa. So my accent is South African. And my approach has always been very balanced. I have French heritage. My family are from the Champagne region in France. And for me, it's about being practical, but being playful, because well-being is not a destination. We don't arrive. I don't have all the answers. And so it's not the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. It's a constant journey. And so having fun is important. And now we even know that acknowledging that you're actually enjoying what you're doing is key to sustaining new behaviors. So the latest science is showing that affirming and celebrating and noticing that you're actually drinking more water or getting more sleep is one of the vital steps to ensure that you actually practice those for them to become almost unconscious competence. So well-being is a vast topic. Some people think of it in terms of massage at a spa. That's part of it. For me, it's around your physical well-being, which is everything related to, well, your body means business, right? Yeah, that's great. And I'm interested to know, I'd like to know more about the lean caffeine as well, because I've switched 2 weeks ago to mushroom coffee and felt a difference. But I digress. So it's about your physical well-being is around what you choose to eat, what you choose to drink, how you move, how you exercise, how you rest. Your emotional well-being is key. And more I'm doing work in the space because we know that your heart changes your state faster than your brain does. So if you know how to tap into, for instance, heart coherence and understand heart rate variability, you can reduce the stress response and positively impact your brain and even those around you, because this is no longer woo-woo stuff. We can measure this, like the electromagnetic field that your heart gives out, depending on what kind of emotion you're choosing to feel. And then we have our mental, intellectual, or our mind. And then we've also got this aspect of, oh, I went a bit fast there, of our spiritual well-being, which I never used to talk about, but now more and more I am. And it can be a spirituality or a faith, but most importantly, it's about, do you belong? Do you feel like you're contributing, perhaps part of a community? And all four of these are important. And I'm curious, if you were to choose one, which one do you feel strongest in today, this morning? Maybe pop that into the chat. Knowing that well-being shifts and changes, right? If you had a bad night's sleep last night, then your physical well-being might not feel that great, but your mind might feel strong. So which one do you feel strongest in at the moment? And if you're happy to share, you could pop that into the chat. If I were to rate these in terms of making it easy to kind of do it all, because if this was easy, we would all be doing it. I would say that if you make sure that you've got a strong physical base, it makes it easier to show up at your best emotionally and mentally. Because it's hard to regulate your emotions, to have a sense of meaning if you're sleep deprived and dehydrated, for instance. So today, we're specifically going to take a look at that base of that pyramid, how to be sure that you've got the fundamentals in place. And I quite like how this pyramid makes me think of how I grew up watching my parents serve champagne. So this is what they did. So my parents, they went on honeymoon from Champagne, the region in France, to South Africa, and they ended up staying in South Africa 52 years later. And they would always pour the champagne, you know, into the top glass, and it would overflow and trickle down. The glasses would sit on a tray. And so if there was any overflow into the tray, my mother would get that. So there was no wastage. And this is a beautiful illustration of, as a leader at the top, are you firstly effervescent and feeling bubbly yourself? Because only when you are full can you potentially then overflow and impact those around you. So let's take a look. We're going to get a score by the end of our time together that will give you an idea of how you're doing and if potentially there are areas that you could relook and revisit. So the framework we're going to work through is the Wellculator, which is a tool I put together when I first started to do workplace well-being initiatives. And so we're going to look at 10 different areas quite quickly. So if you want to go deep down into any of these, I have lots of resources that I can always share with you. You're welcome to be in touch with me after you get the thank you note. The first one takes a look at how we refuel. So do you have a strategy in terms of the way that you feed yourself that helps to sustain your energy and good health? This is what I come across a lot. There's morning madness going on depending on what your circumstances are. You may have been awake between 1 and 3, and so you feel a bit tired. You end up grabbing whatever you can. You have back-to-back Zoom calls and team meetings and proposals and endless emails. And so you end up having back-to-back cups of coffee. Lunch is quite quick. You don't really stop for lunch, kind of keep on answering WhatsApps and maybe checking up the news. And in the afternoon, if you have an energy slump, you may reach out for something salty or sweet, or perhaps another coffee. And then at the end of the day, when we relax, it's so easy to then eat more than we really need because we're overfamished. And maybe there's wine and chocolate that bookends that. So I'm not sure if aspects of this resonates with you at all. And what I'd like to highlight are two things. There's not much color going on the slide, and also the impact on our blood glucose. If we don't fuel correctly, our blood glucose can be all over the show, which means that we increase inflammation, we increase cravings, it makes it harder for your immune system to work optimally and for you to lose weight. And thank you, Danielle, for sharing that. That used to be your whole life. So I'm so curious to know what you're doing now, because I'm about to share a strategy that works for me most of the time. And a lot of the research supports that the Mediterranean style approach to refueling is good. However, this doesn't work for everybody. The key is find out what's happening inside your body through doing the right kind of data tests. And I'm going to share with you what kind of health tests you can do, and then make sure that you've got a program that works for you. The key, if I have breakfast, I say if, because I occasionally do intermittent fasting. I don't do intermittent fasting if I'm sleep deprived, because some of the research shows that that can increase ghrelin and inflammation and actually worsen the stress response. So it's important to, actually, we were just chatting about this. Ollie and I were talking at the start, how some days you can feel great, and the next day you do the same exercise program and you feel exhausted. And that's because we are emotional beings, you know. So staying in tune with your body and listening is key. It's partly why we're seeing so much burnout, is because we just work as if we're robots, you know, and don't always pay attention. So if you have breakfast and snacks and hopefully stop for lunch, is to include color. You can see there's a lot more color going on, and perhaps to also consider balancing protein and plant fats with the color, because that stabilizes blood glucose more effectively. If you would like food ideas, because I know not everybody's a nutritionist or a dietitian, I can easily send that to you. I've got a lot of worksheets that I've put together to make this practical and fun. A key thing to ask yourself in the afternoon when your energy drops is 3 things. Are you hydrated? And by being hydrated, I would generally recommend that we have a glass of water, which is 250 mils per 10 kilograms that you weigh. So if you're quite small and petite, you may need 5 or 6 glasses of water. If you're larger and you weigh over 100, you need more than 10. And water is any fluid that is caffeine-free, sugar-free, and alcohol-free. So hydration is key for managing energy and performance. So too is movement and fresh air. So we have something called, I just took a deep breath as I did that, is email apnea. When we sit for long periods of time in front of our computers, we can contract and constrict and we don't move. And so we don't breathe deep diaphragmatic breaths, which can impact our performance because we don't get enough oxygen. And nature is a food group. So the more time you can spend in nature, especially when you're under high stress, the better. In fact, in a moment, we're going to do a quick exercise just to use the breath as an indicator of how you're feeling potentially. And when you're doing this, when you're refueling a bit more strategically, having fresh air, hydrating, thinking of moving, exposing yourself to nature, it makes it easier to make better choices when you are relaxing, and potentially at the end of the day, where you don't need to be consuming perhaps as much fuel as you do. So let's actually do an exercise. I'm going to set my timer for a minute. And what I invite you to do is bring your awareness to your breath. Don't change your breath. What I'd like you to do is count how many breath cycles you take over the 60 seconds. So an inhale and an exhale is 1 breath cycle. So I will set my time in a moment and count you down. So start counting your breath cycles in 3, 2, 1. So bring your awareness to your chest, to your breath, and notice your breath cycles. If your mind has wandered, without criticism or judgment, gently bring it back to the breath. Okay. If you're happy, share in the chat how many breath cycles you took. I'd be curious to see. Thank you, Danielle. 12, 15, 12, 11. Thomas, now I was wondering if anybody would get to single digits. Okay, wow, good breathers. Yeah, lately the average is over 20, easily. The worst was a group of lawyers that I worked with. They were like 27 was the average, it was high. So the key here, there's so much evidence to show that when you're breathing deeply and slowly, it makes it almost impossible to get pulled into the fight or flight response, which is where we can have that lizard hijack wizard moment in the brain, like where the limbic system takes over and you lose big picture thinking, you don't have a sense of humor, you can't really access proper memory. So it's beneficial to not get pulled into the fight or flight response. And then there's many other things that take place when your body is surged with adrenaline and cortisol. Not good. And deep breathing stops that. So you can still be exposed to the threat, the email, the stress, or the difficult situation, the crisis, but internally you're not going into crisis mode. So it really is good to try and breathe 6 to 8 breath cycles per minute. So getting to single digits is great. A lot of this research comes from HeartMath and heart coherence. So if that's the one thing that you take from our time together this morning, is how could you potentially breathe in, actually, as we spend the next 20 minutes or so together, bring your awareness to breathing a bit deeper into your belly. Let your belly relax. We're often brought up in a culture of, like, you know, the six-pack kind of pull in our tummies, which is very unhealthy. We lose a lot of strength and power and the diaphragm can't push down. So even if you breathe a centimeter more than what you were before, and when you exhale, to allow your exhale to be a second or two longer. That's a very powerful message. It calls in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest. So it literally activates that vagus nerve, which sends good messages up to the brain saying, okay, we don't need to panic. Everything's okay. And then you keep much better cognitive ability as well. Yeah, so slow, deep breathing. And then, of course, you can use breath in many different ways. Some of you might be doing this holotropic breathing and energizing breathing, and like the Navy SEALs box breathing to help you sleep at night. I use breathing to help energize me, and it's a fun tool. The most important thing is that it is the first place where we generally can see that we are being pulled into the stress response. So you may have recalled from the slide before that it was quite colorful. And when it comes to nutrition, one of the best pieces of advice is to eat like an artist. So to have a lot of color in your diet. Color does not come from Skittles and wine gums and M&Ms though. It comes from nature's fresh produce. And as a minimum, we should be eating 5 tennis ball portions of these kind of foods a day. But because of my genetic background and the possibility for Alzheimer's and cancer in my family, I aim for 10. And I specifically, this is where, no matter where you are, even if I've got one of my best friends is vegan, is to make sure that you eat the rainbow. So like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet foods, because it's the color compounds that are bioactive that help in terms of vitamins and minerals and reducing inflammation and optimizing our health and well-being. Yeah, so if you'd like this chart, actually, I've got a few handouts like this that I put together that I'd be very happy to share with you. The key reason why, and thanks to Simon Sinek, we all understand, like once you have a why, you'll find a how. So why are colorful foods good? I mean, they're generally low in calories. So if you want to manage your weight, this is the way to go. Put color on your plate. The main reason is the impact that they have on your gut. And in your gut, we have this universe of bacteria, this microbiome, without which we couldn't survive. And the link between your microbiome and your brain and your performance is incredible. There's more diversity in your gut than there is in a rainforest, by the way. And looking after your gut can help your health in many ways. One personal story is my mom, when they moved to South Africa, so in her early 20s, because of the stress and the change in diet and things, she developed constipation. So her gut wasn't that good. And whenever she was stressed, her skin would flare up. And about 5 years ago, she went through a very stressful time. And her skin flared up the worst it's ever been. So it came up onto her neck and her face, and she had this psoriasis that was in her scalp. And the doctors couldn't give her any more of the neostigazine, the corticosteroid treatment that she had. And so she really took a look at other aspects of her life, and she started changing. She started eating a lot more colorful foods, looking after her gut health, taking a probiotic. And within 4 months, I took this picture. She had beneficially not only improved her gut health, she wasn't experiencing constipation anymore, but her skin cleared. And it's been 5 years on. And during lockdown, I was on the phone. It was my mother's birthday. It was quite emotional for various reasons, because I usually go to South Africa 3 times a year, and now this is the longest time in my entire life that I haven't been able to go back, as we all have stories like that. But on her birthday, I was having a coffee chat with her on WhatsApp, and the flowers that I had arranged arrived in the 15 minutes that I was on the call with her, which was amazing. So I was crying. But the point is, we got a photograph of the flowers and what she's eating. So she's having a croissant, which is not really gut-friendly food, but it highlights the 80-20 principle. When you look after your well-being and you know what works for you, and you do it 80% of the time, 20% of the time, you don't need to. And you can still get great results. Like my mom is managing her skin and has not taken that corticosteroid since then. So I don't know each of you personally, but I know that many of us are struggling with some kind of health condition. It could be a mood disorder. Mental health is now linked to gut, weight issues, tiredness, fatigue, inflammatory-based conditions like arthritis or skin issues. And when you look at the gut and you fine-tune, you can have incredible impact on the rest of your well-being. So yeah, that is really an important thing, is to bring in more color into our foods and more diversity of the colorful foods. If you would like some inspiration from me, once a week I send out a foodie recipe. I try and keep it quite simple because I'm not a chef, but I always try and use colorful foods. And you can always receive that by going to my website. And I often have people tell me that they love my recipes. And so I'll sometimes ask them, which ones have you tried? And people will often say, no, none, but I think of you like every Friday or every Wednesday. So I don't mind if you never print a recipe and try it, but if it's a way for me to get in and remind you that we spoke about the Wellculator, you may not remember how to pronounce my name, but it'll remind you that you were thinking and planning and you had a personal pledge around your well-being. That's great. That's great. So we've spoken about hydration and mindful eating and eating like an artist and strategic refueling. What I'd like to mention now, which I've touched on before, is how important it is to know your health numbers. So in your business, you absolutely understand the importance of knowing numbers and then changing a strategy if the numbers don't work. And the same applies to your health. So I hope that you're testing things at a basic level. You should be testing your cholesterol, your blood pressure, and your glucose once a year. But because we have access to these tests, you can literally contact a company like Thriver or Forth with Life. And I can always pop these into the chat. And you can find out, for instance, if you're taking vitamin D, are you absorbing it? I use this as an example because for a year I was taking vitamin D. I had my test done last month and it's like subclinically low. I chatted to my doctor because you think I'd know this stuff. And she's like, no, you're obviously not taking the right format. You need an oil-based 5,000 international units a day. So I'm back onto that and I'll test again. And it's like, this doesn't have to cost a lot. So Thriver, Forth with Life, and really basically definitely check your cholesterol, your glucose, your blood pressure. You can't just do with a pinprick. You potentially need a device. So if you know that there's maybe heart disease in your family, I'd go to the trouble to do that. Cool is meant to be cholesterol, not cool. There we go. And fascinating if you know what type of cholesterol is high or low. Like my cholesterol is quite high, but it's the good cholesterol that's quite high. So I'm not too concerned about that. Then there's also the field of nutrigenomics, where you can do DNA-based tests that can give you very specific advice around what supplements, what exercise, what kind of things you could look out for. And that's where, I'm fascinated by that field and doing a lot of research in that. And if you want to explore that, I'd recommend DNA Fit. Have got a test called Premium. It's 500 quid. You would do it once. The insights are phenomenal. I have found these tests life-changing. There's another company called LifeCode that is incredibly good. There's a colleague of mine, Amanda Archibald, who's doing a presentation where she's going to take you through her genetic report to show you what kind of information you could get from doing these kind of tests. Because people often, like my brother's quite concerned. He's like, I don't want to be told that I'm not going to be able to enjoy a meal next summer because I won't be around. It's not about that. It really can add quality of life and help you not waste money on supplements and things that you may not be needing or absorbing. So if you're interested in that, I would look up Amanda Archibald or be in touch with me because I can share the link of her doing that at the end of March. There's no one globally that I know that is doing that kind of thing, which is great, for free. I think it's for free. Yeah. All right. The next very important number is how many hours of sleep you get. How many hours of sleep did you have last night? Please pop that into the chat. Because sleep is absolutely vital for our performance. Okay, quite a range. Not enough, yeah. I don't want to go too much in the detail of why we need sleep. If you haven't seen the TED Talk by Matthew Walker called Why Sleep is Your Superpower, I think it's one of the most watched TED Talks. It's outstanding. He's the author of Why We Sleep. Yeah, the book. It's every single system in your body gets negatively affected if we're not having enough sleep. But let's make it practical, because I know that too. I'm a recovering insomniac. And by the way, the genetic tests that I've had done have explained why I have insomnia. So I've got 2 genetic defects. It sounds awful, but I've got genes that don't work that well. So I don't clear out the dopamine in my brain. I've got loads of dopamine and serotonin, fortunately. So the world is a rosy place for me. I'm highly motivated. But the problem is that dopamine stays in my brain. So I have to do things at night to help release dopamine. I wouldn't have known that. I would have just continued to struggle with insomnia, and not everything works. So this is why it's so useful to know these kind of things about yourself. I do a whole masterclass on sleep using the seasons because I feel like it's helped me enormously. So the seasons remind us that we have periods of high intensity like summer, and we have periods of low activity and wanting to go inward like winter. And if you overlap the seasons as an analogy for a 24-hour period, spring would be the early morning, from when you wake up to when you start engaging with work or the outside world or anything that could potentially trigger the stress response. So on that note, actually, and then summer is when you're actually at work and performing and being busy. And then you've got autumn or the fall, which is that transition into your evening, which is where I know at the moment, working from home, that line is so blurred that we end up just mixing everything. And we don't have the rituals that we used to have, like leaving the office, saying goodbye to colleagues, walking out the door, catching a commute, or getting into the car, driving, walking through the front door. Those were big declarations allowing our mind and our body to know that we had transitioned into another time of the day. Whereas now we're just going, from the living room back to the living room. So quite important to think about rituals at the end of the day that can help you to unplug. And then winter is like the hibernation. It's the time that you're in bed. We need 8 hours of sleep, give or take an hour, 99% of us. So that would be the winter. Sleep, though, is not just about when you put your head on your pillow and you hope to just fall off and tap into like good rhythmic REM sleep and have dreams and then wake up refreshed in the morning. It starts with how you start your day. So if you think of spring as the beginning of your day, how long was your spring this morning? So your spring started when you became conscious. You opened your eyes, either because of an alarm or a sound or a noise or naturally. And it stopped when you either got a WhatsApp, a Telegram message, an email, or looked at social media or the news, or started working on your emails. So how long was your spring this morning? Thank you, Patricia.
What was the question?
Anybody longer than 5 minutes? I'm guessing that's because you use your phone as an alarm, and so it's easy to be there. Or Gary, like you say, you just put on the news. Yeah, a lot of us do that. So Danielle, the question was, how long was your spring this morning? Spring is the time from when you become conscious to when the outside world is let in a way that it can impact your stress response. So through the news, through social media, generally it's through these devices, the television, our phones, or our laptops. And a lot of the research is showing that it's called the hypnagogic phase, when you wake up and you've got this very open happening between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. So it's generally not a good idea to immediately go into other people's agendas before you've actually checked in with yourself. So a lot of us don't even greet ourselves. We greet our phones or see what other people are up to and what they want to say. And then we we start producing adrenaline, maybe even cortisol, which is exhausting and draining. And spring is the one time a day that even as entrepreneurs and business owners, we have perhaps a little bit more ability to take some time for ourselves, even if it is 15 minutes, because you usually have 5 minutes, or maybe it could be an hour if you're able to do that. And then what do you do in that time? Sure, if you're not already trying mindfulness techniques, that could work, or stretching, or going and spending time in nature, or just having a cup of tea and allowing your mind to wander. Martin Seligman, who's a doctor and considered the father of positive psychology, says that like humans don't know how to get bored anymore. We don't daydream because we have no open gaps in our time. You know, the documentary Social Dilemma, anybody watch that? If you haven't, I would recommend that. It's scary, but Social Dilemma explains how addictive the internet is and social media, and how important it is to have time where we don't always check Instagram, check WhatsApp, check emails, because we get pulled into summer really quickly. And then we're busy, busy, busy. And how does summer relate to your sleep? Because that's the conversation we're having at the moment. Do you give yourself permission to stop, to pause? Because pauses are essential. It's a bit like a professional athlete training for a big event. You can't just run an ultra marathon. You need to have trained and run and swam and done a bit of stretching for months before. So this is the same principle. In the day, can you take, like the smallest break should be what I call the 20-20-20. So every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away from your screen and blink and stay at that 20 feet away for 20 seconds. That's like a minimum break because that helps with avoiding eye strain and screen fatigue. Then besides stopping every 20 minutes for 20 seconds, every hour, we should be aware of our posture. We should alternate between sitting and standing. We should definitely take a 10-minute lunch break. I mean, if you were French or Italian, you'd be taking a lot longer than that, but like 10 minutes is a minimum. Those little permissions in the day help you to allow permission for rest. And I know on the days that I give myself microcharge, micro breaks, it's easier for me to fall asleep at night rather than I'm so hyper aroused. There's so much adrenaline in my system. I'm so switched on that I'm so exhausted. I'm tired, but I'm wired and I can't sleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night, or I don't have a good night's rest. So sleep is determined by how we start our day, how we go through our day, and certainly how we transition at the end of the day. And here, the key thing, if you want to tune out and transition into your evening and relax, we need to step away from screens and stimulus and input. And there's a lot of things that you could be doing in this time. There's a handout that I've created that you're welcome to download from our website. Or if you're interested, I'll share with you. I'm doing a masterclass on this topic next week, how to tune out. Because we can use creativity, down regulation techniques, breathing, a lot to help us transition into winter so that when you're in bed wanting to hibernate, you can. And then there's a lot here around your bedroom. Like now, if you think of your bedroom, is it welcoming? Does it feel peaceful? Do you like the colors? Do you like the linen that you sleep in? Is the temperature right? Is your mattress quite new? There's a lot of physical things that we often take for granted that are key. Things like the sound and the noise and the light, quite easy things to potentially change. Sometimes even just shifting how your bedroom's set up or decluttering can help if you're feeling stuck around sleep. So like I mentioned, on my website, there's a sleep guide that you can download, or you can email me and I'll send it through to you. Before we move on and finalize the Wellculator, I'd like you to reflect on, because this is a really important topic, if we want to sustain high performance and avoid burnout. So based on what I've shared around the seasons, is there a particular time of day that you have a longing to be stronger in or to cultivate more rest in? So if you think of spring and summer, autumn, winter, which of those four, because you can't take all four and try and do too much, you'll set yourself up for failure as opposed to success. Is there one that's resonating with you? And perhaps just reflect on that for yourself. Great. So I've spoken about mindfulness is key, and mindfulness can be many different things. It doesn't have to be a sit down and really do meditation. If that works for you, great. But it can also be being present in the moment, because we spend a lot of time worrying about the future or being anxious potentially about the past, which are illusions of time. We're at our best when we're grounded in the moment. So right now we can do a mindfulness exercise. As I'm speaking, this meeting is not being adjourned. We're going on. Can you bring your awareness to, there's a lovely exercise that you may have come across called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 senses exercise. So you start with 5 things that you can see. So notice 5 things around you. Maybe something's a color, or there's a card, or you've got something quirky on your desk like I do. This is what Kiko, the 6-year-old, made for me because I like elephants. This reminds me to be playful, not take myself too seriously. So 5 things that you can see. Then think of 4 things that you can feel. Maybe the ground beneath your feet. I can feel the stool supporting me as I kind of sit and stand. Feel where your hands are. And then 3 things that you can hear. You can hear my voice, but could you expand your attention to outside of the room that you're in? When we're stressed potentially and pulled into the stress response, we become very constricted and narrow focused. And so increasing our awareness to what's happening around us using our visual or auditory senses can help a lot to make us feel more expansive. This is work done and measured by Wendy Palmer, the author of Leadership Embodiment. You can actually measure how these things work and how they impact your charisma as a leader. It's fascinating. And then 2 things related to your nose or smelling. And here I always say, well, you have 2 nostrils, so take 2 deep breaths in. Take this opportunity to breathe. The breath is something that you cannot do in the past or the future. So when you're aware of breathing deeply, you're in the present moment. That's why the breath is generally the anchor for all forms of mindfulness and meditation. And then lastly, bring your awareness to your mouth and maybe notice the texture in your mouth. Are you dehydrated? Do you need a sip of water? Would you like to taste anything? Could you imagine tasting something? And that's a simple exercise that I sometimes do all 5 of, or just 1, to bring myself back into the moment. And I can do that while I'm on a call. It's not like I have to stop and disengage. Disengaging those key. So activating and moving your body during your workday, we know is important. So stretching and moving and alternating sit and stand, and not always having cameras on so you feel like you have to always be amazing and look right, but being able to, especially if you know a client or you've got a regular meeting, to maybe just switch off the camera and walk around and not just stay still. And I hope that you're giving yourself the gift of physical exercise that you enjoy. Half an hour on most days of the week is a bare minimum. The key here with exercise is to include a combination of high intensity, cardiovascular type exercise, and definitely stretching. Don't compromise on the stretching. Something that I always think is quite simple, but everyone seems to love is, I did this for a few years, something called the 5 Tibetan Rites. It's a series of 5 stretches that you can do in your living room, takes 7 minutes or so. And it's just a nice way to keep you aware of, stretching out your lower back and your shoulders. But any physical movement you do, just make sure that, I'm not an expert in exercise, and if you have an injury, make sure that you do what works well for you. And lastly, the last point on the Wellculator, which is certainly not, well, it's last, but it's important, is, do you know when you are potentially triggered into the stress response, and have you got techniques to manage that? So like we did the mindful minute, that can be a very powerful awareness technique of, how am I in this moment? Am I taking 6 to 8 breath cycles a minute to minimize the impact of the stress response? It's important to know what happens in your body when you're stressed. I can't help but talk about champagne. This is a picture I took the last time I was in South Africa, November 2019. I was at a wine farm. And generally at the end of rows of vines, certainly in the Champagne region, you'll see roses. Now they're there for 2 reasons. Specifically today, what I want to highlight is the roses are there to act as an alarm system, because they will get affected by a mildew or an aphid, before the vines will. So the vineyard manager will be alerted to the fact that there's an issue. I need to be proactive. Otherwise I could lose the whole crop. What is your alarm system? What are your roses, your red flags? How do you know when physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you could be stretched is okay if it's temporary. Stretching too far can snap. I've snapped. If I can snap and I know and breathe this stuff, it can happen to any one of us. So being aware of what happens to your body through stress is key. And having techniques that you default to, and you only default to things that you practice. So this deep breathing, relaxing the shoulders, staying mobile, those are things that in theory we know are good for us, but are you actually practicing them 80% of the time? So we've been through the Wellculator. I'd like you to score yourself. Give yourself 1 point if you answer yes, and no point if you answer no. So 80% of the time, do you have a strategy around the way that you refuel that helps you to sustain good health and good energy? Yes or no? If it's yes, 1 point. Do you eat like an artist? So are you having enough color in your diet? That means at least 5 tennis ball portions a day and a full spectrum from the rainbow. That encourages you to have good, healthy gut health. Yes or no? Generally, do you practice mindful eating? So do you actually stop for 10 minutes at least and eat food without being distracted? And do you savor it? Mm-hmm. There's more involved with mindful eating, but for today, that's enough. Do you hydrate enough? So are you having about a glass of water for every 10 kilograms that you weigh? Do you know your health numbers? So on a basic level, are you keeping track of your cholesterol and your glucose and your blood pressure? And of course, you can deep dive into things like your micronutrients and your genetics. Are you getting enough sleep? So generally, do you wake up feeling rested? Do you have some kind of mindfulness ritual, be it breathing, meditation, solitude in nature, that helps you disengage from the outside world so that you can tap into that inner wisdom, that intuition that we know often comes up when we allow ourselves time and space without distraction? Are you moving regularly? So every 20 minutes, are you like moving your eyeballs? Every hour, you're moving your body? And are you doing intentional exercise on most days of the week, including stretching? So stretching has got to be part of that. And are you aware of your red flags, those roses? Like what happens in your body when you're potentially overly stressed? And have you got techniques to help you with it? If you're happy to share in the chat, I'd love to know what your Wellculator score is today. Gary Paul, thank you. Nicola, thanks. I think it's Nicola if I remember. Okay, so the average is higher than usual, which is great. Because the average is generally about 4 or 5, but it's not about what the score is. The idea is this is not rocket science. We know this is good for us. And the ideal score would be 10 out of 10, because ideally you'd be doing all of it most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. So, thank you, Danielle. You've reevaluated that. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is think about what is one thing on the Wellculator, because even if your score is 8, I don't want you to pick the last 2 things that you said no to. And if your score is lower than that, is pick one thing that you feel motivated to change and something that you can put into practice pretty quickly and that you can keep super tiny, because this is the recipe for success if you want to create new behaviors. Make it a tiny new behavior, super tiny. Like let's say you know you're not hydrating well, like you have far too much regular tea and coffee. The goal is not to have 6 glasses of water. The goal would be to have 1 glass of water with your morning coffee or with when you brush your teeth. So attach the new behavior that's super tiny and realistic to something that you currently do. No, Paul, you cannot revise your score using those. Thank you for checking. I appreciate that. If you said it was herbal teas, I'd say sure. So attaching a new behavior to something that you already do, and I'm going to give you 2 examples of places where you can think about doing this that you might not have thought of before, is key. And then catch yourself doing it. This is important. So celebration is key. And by celebration, I don't mean going like crazy. I mean, yeah, sure, you can jump around and shout out, yabba dabba doo. Even just a little smile to yourself, like, I'm drinking this glass of water. Like I'm cool. I set out to do this. What that does is it sends dopamine to the reward center of the brain, but it helps you feel good. And we change most when we feel good, not bad. So think about how you may celebrate, even if it is just a quiet smile to yourself or a metaphorical pat on the back. 2 places that you could think of using as anchors are places where you need to wait around. So I don't know about you, I boil the kettle a lot. In fact, I have friends down in Devon that have one of these fancy taps that just let out hot water straight away. I don't enjoy that at all because I'm like, I can't do my mindful minute when I'm with them. So when you're waiting for something like the water in the bathroom to heat up, could you maybe develop a gratitude practice? Could you do a minute of stretching? And while the kettle's boiling, could you tap into or become aware of your breath? I've got these ankle mobility exercises that my chiro just wants me to do, and I've started to do them while the kettle's boiling because I wasn't doing them for months. So find an anchor. And maybe there's something that irritates you. So I have a neighbor that, bless him, he has autism. So he's got a very particular routine, which includes waking up at 4:30 and slamming the door at about 5:15. And I could get irritated, or I could reframe that. So what I do, if it wakes me up most of the time. I'm like, oh, how lucky am I? I've still got an hour or so that I can lie in bed, and I relax my jaw, my muscles. And so it's becoming almost, yeah, I'm enjoying it because he slams the door in the day too. And every time I hear it, I relax the tongue in my mouth because I carry a lot of tension in my jaw. So is there anything that maybe irritates you that you could link to a new behavior? Right. So to pull this all together, I would like you to commit in writing, if you don't mind, in the chat, out of everything we've shared on the Wellculator and the seasons as a framework for resting, let's just pick one thing. What is one tiny habit that you think you could tweak or start or do differently? And do you know when you'll do it? Because right now you might be fully motivated, but by Monday you'll be potentially forgetful about it. So what will you attach it to? I'd love to know. What is one thing that you're going to take from our time together? Because you've given me your most valuable resource, which is your energy and time and attention. Thank you, Dave. You'll get a follow-up note. So pop into the chat. I'd love to see what is your personal pledge. Thanks, Paul. If you want to drink more water, when you go to the bathroom, you could always have a glass. Or if there's something else that you drink, before you have another one of that, you could link it to that. Ollie, wonderful. Yeah, breathing is something that I'm personally working with at the moment, and it has huge rewards. Yeah. If you're interested, you can always be in touch with me and I can share some of the research and things and ideas that I've found.
Thanks, Celine.
Yeah, yeah. Because we need to do this together. I mean, if this was easy, Danielle, I love that you're going to have a herbal tea before you go to bed. If you find it wakes you up at night and that causes you to maybe struggle to go back to sleep, try and have it at least an hour before you want to go to bed. And if you always drink the same herbal tea in the same mug, it can become a bit like a lullaby for a baby. You know, we do the same things for our kids to put them to bed. If you do the same things for you, it can become a bit like the Pavlov effect. You start to wind down and do that. Yeah. Brilliant. I love these pledges. So you'll get a follow-up note from me. If you would like to stay in touch, you don't have to do this on your own. Every month, I run a masterclass on a particular theme. Last month was on burnout. This month, which is next week, is on tune out to tune in. So we're specifically going to look at how do you stay energized and motivated for remote working and how you can relax and unwind at the end of the day when you're working and living from home. And yeah, I'd love to see you there or anytime in the future, because really the world needs more effervescent leaders. So don't give up your health while you're building wealth. It's important to help yourself so that you can help others, and own that title, Chief Energy Officer. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celine. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great.
Great job. Great job.
And as Celine said, anything at all you want to ask her, send it via me and I can link you up with Celine. But that was wonderful, I thought. So thank you very much. We had you, back in 2017, our Vistage group?
Yeah, in London.
Yeah, 4 years ago nearly. So no, it's always very good, great content. Thank you. So guys, thanks for attending this morning. We've got some announcements next week. We're in the process of booking our first physical meeting. It's going to be in September, and we'd love to have as many people as along to that as possible. But we'll get the numbers out and the dates out and stuff like that. So if you could do that, and we're going to confirm next week our 3 group session meetings for the next quarter, April, May and June. And also we'll see you back on the 25th of March, which is a Thursday, for our group board session, which we can't wait. So looking forward to seeing you all then. Thanks, Celine.
Thank you.
Does anyone want to raise anything at all, or have a chat? Any questions or?
Have you got time, Celine, quickly?
Yes. Yeah, I'm free till 11. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, so one is, obviously, a lot of this is if you're feeling bad or unwell. So like the advice of sleeping. If I go to bed and the first thing I do is put the TV on, but that makes me go to sleep like within seconds, is that a bad thing? Should I try and not use the TV, but then I worry then I won't just fall asleep easily?
Great question. I would do 2 things. Try and not use it for maybe 2 weeks, and because you don't know what you don't know. So give it a try. And if it works for you, great. I would be conscious though of what you watch before you fall asleep. Like, I know if I'm watching Outlander, I dream of the French and the Scots like slaughtering each other, even though I love it. So the last thing that you see, it's the same as when you wake up in the morning. That hypnagogic phase, the conscious mind and the subconscious is very open. And yeah, so just consider that. It
wouldn't be the news or anything like that. It'd be
good. Because you don't want to be watching Trump, like just before you go to bed.
Any other questions?
But that shows you how different we all are. I can't watch TV before I go to bed. And if it works for you, that's great. It's important to try new things and stay open. But if you find something that works for you, awesome.
My wife's got a question. She says she can't sleep because her husband's got the TV on when he goes to bed.
What's more important to you? A happy wife, happy life, maybe?
I'll try and turn the TV on.
Yeah, that is difficult. That's a reality of sharing a bedroom, sharing a bed, and having different needs for temperature. And some people like weighted blankets and some don't. Yeah.
Daniel's got a question, and Dave White.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was amazing. Loved it. Loved so much of that. I got so much to take away. My question was, when you deliver this to different organizations, where do you meet the most resistance? Or do you meet any resistance?
No, at the moment, I don't meet any resistance. The resistance I used to have would be if I wasn't clear on the science behind the topic with certain groups, and then they started feeling like it might be a bit spiritual or woo-woo. But because I'm a scientist at heart, everything I share is actually based in some kind of science. So no, there's no resistance. As long as I've had a proper briefing and I understand, like a creative group I'll tweak it slightly differently to maybe a legal group or a more analytical type group. But people are so open. It's been one of the good things around this pandemic, when we all understand well-being, and it's not a priority anymore. It's like it's absolutely essential, at the top of the list. You can't have a well business without well people. Yeah. Thanks, Daniel.
Dave?
Hi there, Celine. I've really enjoyed it. It's been fascinating, and I'm one of these reflectors, so I take things away and chew over it, and we'll probably have 1,000 questions tomorrow. But one thing I just wanted to ask you is, you mentioned that history in your family of, I think you said, Alzheimer's and cancer.
Yeah.
But was that what prompted you to do this? Did you do the DNA test? Is that what you did to find out more about yourself, and what prompted you?
Well, yes, actually. So the test didn't tell me about my risk for Alzheimer's or cancer. I just know that if I look at, my maternal and paternal side. And we know that certain foods can activate certain proteins that then change your chemistry. So I, for instance, eat cruciferous vegetables every day because they will lower your risk potentially for cancer. Yeah, food really is medicine. I mean, medicine comes from plants. So botany as a field is really important. So it was a combination of both. It was seeing what was happening and knowing what had caused distress or dis-ease in my family, and then getting these kind of tests and feedback and putting it together. I mean, I'm still working it out. I've got a health coach, a therapist, a dietitian, Amanda Archibald, giving me advice, because there's a lot of moving parts, and I think we should all have those kind of experts that we can tap into as part of our inner circle. Yeah.
And have you got that information in terms of some of those foods that you mentioned? Is some of that stuff on your website? My parents and grandparents died when I was my parents died when I was quite young. My grandparents died quite early as well, all of cancer. So it strikes a bit of a chord. It's a lovely, it's a really great thing to actually meet that head on and think, I'm going to see whether there's anything I can actually do about it, which is a great, I've not thought about that before, really.
If you haven't, this is a great book, The Genomic Kitchen, by that dietitian Amanda, and she's the one who's doing that free. She's showing you her DNA report to explain what you can get from these tests.
Right.
So I would definitely. I've never seen any dietitian do that before, which is great. That could be a great place to start, because I don't have anything specifically on that on my website, because I'd have to have a conversation with you one-on-one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. That's great. Thank you.
Great. And if you don't know David White, the poet,
I think we're spelt differently, aren't we? I think there's a Y in his name, but yeah, I taught him quite a lot.
Well, Sweet Darkness is a poem that he wrote around his own physical exhaustion. So I often use that poem as part of my burnout discussions.
Right.
Yeah.
Danielle, you got another question, or you have? Okay.
Sorry, is that okay? I
yes.
Get another cheeky one in. Actually, I went on this hair course with something related to something else. And I realized when I did a test that I'm not getting enough protein into my diet. And it actually makes a lot of sense to me in lots of other levels. It's really hard for me to eat enough protein as that is actually recommended. And I used to be a vegetarian. I sort of eat a bit of meat now, but for environmental reasons and animal loving reasons, I sort of try not to. So I was wondering, I've thought about supplements, but I'm a bit hesitant about which ones to go for, because I've heard that supplements, like protein supplements, have other stuff in there that might mess with if your balance of eating. And I've always been kind of resistant to a supplement because I want to just eat right. So do you have any thoughts around that at all?
I do, Danielle. I mean, I'm a French foodie at heart. I'd like to say that food gives us everything, but there's no ways. It can't, because of various reasons. Food is not the same as it was. Like, we know that we can measure, like the vitamin C content of our oranges, be them organic or not, are not the same as what they were. So even if you're eating lots of foods, it's potentially that you're not getting it in. And then because of stress, we have increased needs. Like we work through magnesium so fast, and we work through vitamin B so fast. And then genetically, we have increased needs for things. So I do think that there's a gap in most of our diets to potentially supplement, but then you've got to choose the right brand that works for you. And if you specifically want to look at protein, I would look at maybe, because protein wouldn't be a supplement, it would be a powder of some kind, like a pea-based high protein maybe powder that you could have a scoop in a glass of water, and that could give you 15 grams of protein, which would be great. That's like having 3 eggs without having the eggs. Cytoplan is a good brand. Nutri Advanced UK. Those are 2 brands that are good.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to go and research them. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I think that's it. I thank you again, Celine, and we all look forward to seeing everyone at the group session on the 25th, Thursday. I know invites for that to go out towards the end of next week. Yeah, end of next week. So, yeah, any questions, get them over to Gary or I, and we'll forward them to Celine. But thank you again.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you, Ollie. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, Celine.
Thank you.
Bye. Cheers.